All right, everybody. Most of our seasons are coming to a close across the country. Here in Utah, ours went out on Saturday. There's a lot of other states that are going to go out this Saturday. There's a few more, extended seasons. But anyway, we want to go over end of season maintenance on your Mud Buddy. I got a list here. It's a pretty long list, so I'll kind of go through the things. The biggest thing for end of the season storage is fuel stabilizer. We sell this one. It's actually made by Briggs & Stratton for these specific engines. Read the back on the instructions and see exactly how much you're supposed to put in your tank. But with all the ethanol fuel and whatnot that we've got these days, it's super important to put fuel stabilizer in if you're going to leave it for any time more than about 2 weeks. The next thing is all the grease zerks. There's several grease zerks all over this frame where water can get in, especially if you're in a saltwater environment. This one right here is actually very important. Go ahead and hit this one. What'll happen if especially if you're in salt water, is water will get inside of this tube and it will start to rust. And if you leave it sitting for too long, your steering will completely freeze up. And you'll go to use it when you go to fish this spring, and it'll be completely froze up. So get that one greased. There's also a horizontal pivot right here, and there's actually 3 grease zerks on it. So make sure you get that greased. While you've got the grease gun out, you may as well check your drive. A very important thing to remember on your drive is to pull this bolt right here before you insert any grease into it. If you don't, you're going to end up blowing your seals out. So pull this bolt and push new grease in until you see good grease come out of this hole. And then what I like to do is I'll start the engine, run it for 5-10 minutes, let it get warm, and then put the bolt back in. If you don't do that, then the grease will expand and you can still push out your seal. The next thing we've got is some type of corrosion inhibitor. Again, you guys on the coast or anywhere near salt water, this is one that I just picked up at a Napa, but you can get, there's lots of different brands, Corrosion X, all sorts of different types, but it's basically a kind of a penetrating oil that's going to go all over any of your electrical connections. Basically anything that can rust will if you don't put some of this stuff on before you store it. The most important places to put this thing is your electrical connections, battery cables, on the starter, all this wiring. Another thing that I like to do is I'll pull my football, the handle end apart, and I'll spray this stuff on all the switches and connections in there as well. Let's see here. Another thing is torque specs. While you just had a hard season bouncing around off the cypress knees and rocks and whatever else, these bolts are going to come loose. So if you go to our website, backwaterperformance.com, go to Tech Tips, and then you'll see torque specs. Go over that entire list and make sure everything is to Briggs specs. That includes muffler bolts, crankcase cover bolts is extremely important, valve covers, head bolts, you name it. Make sure everything gets back to spec. Let's see, the next thing, this one's pretty important as well, is draining the water if you have any, or at least checking on this belt box. There's a screw right here on the bottom of this belt housing that you can pull out, and that's the drain for your belt box. As you can see here on mine, it's got a little bit of a leak. You can tell there's a little bit of corrosion on the brake system here for the HDR. We got a little bit of water in there, so you've got to find that leak wherever it is. It can come from the big long spaghetti gasket that we use that goes all the way around the belt housing right here, and you can pick this up from us for pretty cheap if you need to replace it. Another place it can come from is there's a seal right here that comes from the factory. If this is wore out or dry rotted, then replace it. What I like to do, even with the spaghetti gasket in place and this gasket, is I'll still run a bead of RTV silicone all the way around, and that just gives me a little bit more insurance that it's not going to leak. Problems that can happen if you do get water in there is it will, believe it or not, it'll completely destroy your sprocket. Water will get in between the belt and the sprocket, and before this carbon belt goes, your sprockets will they'll get razor sharp, and then you'll destroy the belt. So make sure you check that, keep the water out of your belt. Belt tension, we can go over pretty quick. We'll do an in-depth video at some point in the future, but we'll kind of go over it pretty quick. To do that, obviously you've got to remove your belt housing, and then there's 4 bolts on the inside right here that you have to loosen up, and then there's another 8 bolts on the back that need to be loosened up right here, and then there's 4 more right here. They all need to be loosened up. This right here is your belt tensioning bolt. This is how you adjust the tension on the belt. It slides the whole belt housing up and down. So after you do that, but I should say first, check your belt tension before you do any of that. How you check it, you get these little belt tension tools that you can get from us. And then the way I like to do it is put my tape measure inside here. And I didn't actually pull this bolt out, but there's a plug on the side where you're going to insert this in through, and you're going to move your belt a 1/4 of an inch. When you move your belt a 1/4 of an inch, then you look and see where this O-ring is at. You're trying to get to 16 pounds. 16 pounds is what I prefer on a used belt. If you need to put a new belt on, then the tension's going to be somewhere in the range of about 18 or so, and then after an hour or two it'll stretch a little bit, settle in, and you'll be around 16 pounds. To adjust that again, you use that bolt on the side to lift or drop the belt housing, and then get these all those bolts that we talked about earlier back to torque specs. Another thing to check for the off season is valve lash. We covered that pretty extensively last week, but that's something, you can never check your your valve lash too much. I personally like to do it about every 15 hours. I can hear, when it starts to come loose, but check that, every time you think you need to. For the guys that have carb motors, what I like to do before I put that the fuel stabilizer in there, I'll actually pull the bolt on the bowl and completely drain all the fuel out of the carburetor. On a stock carburetor, it's right here. On a Mikuni carburetor, it's right here. You just pull that out, it'll drain all the fuel out of the bowl and get rid of all that nasty fuel that's going to end up varnishing and clogging up all your jets.
While we're talking about carbs, we've got a question here from Wade Simmons. He says, what about an EFI aftermarket kit for the 44 HDR carb models? We do not sell a kit that you can add to a carb motor to convert it to EFI. I think there may be some aftermarket ones out there that are pretty extensive and complicated, but my advice, if you want EFI and have a carb motor, is sell it secondhand to somebody else and pick up an EFI. It's probably going to be cheaper in the long run. I'll go over this real quick. Is motor cover. Even if you're storing it inside, especially if you're storing it outside, use some kind of a waterproof motor cover. This is the biggest piece of insurance you can get for all the corrosion issues and getting dust and sand up inside of everything. We sell these on our website or all of our dealers for $137. No, that's not right. These are $89. These are $89, and we can send them all over the country. Next thing I want to go over is prop balance. Not a lot of people talk about this, but these motors are inherently susceptible to vibration. Where a lot of that comes from is these props. We beat the crap out of these things, beating them on stumps and rocks and trees and you name it. Obviously this one's pretty beat up. If you don't have a balanced prop, you're going to run into all sorts of issues like cracking muffler flanges. You know, all these parts on your drive can crack. There's a million things on here that are susceptible to vibration. So how I like a quick, easy, visual way to check that is start up the motor. What you're going to want to do is rev it up to about 2,000, 2,500 RPMs. And you're going to watch skeg right here. Watch this very carefully. If you see this skeg start to look like it's blurry, then you know your prop is out of balance. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate. This one may have a little tiny bit of an imbalance because of the nicks and dings on here, but it wasn't too bad. If you start to see that thing look like it's blurry, then you know it's time to change your prop or get it balanced somewhere. You're going to save yourself, money in the long run on broken mufflers and all sorts of stuff. I think the very last thing that I want to go over is trailer bearings. This is something that's often overlooked, but you might as well do it now so you don't put the boat, in the garage, out of sight, out of mind. In April, you go to fish, take it out, and your bearings are a problem. How I check that is lift it up with a jack and then grab the tire, and if there's any lateral movement in the tire at all, then you need to repack your bearings at a bare minimum. If it's any worse than just a little bit of lateral movement, then you may need to replace them. They're cheap. You can pick them up at local parts store for 10, 15 bucks. That'll save you a lot of headache and lost time fishing if you don't get that fixed up. Another thing I actually just thought of is battery maintenance. Before I bought a trickle charger, I was buying $150 batteries every single year. So get some kind of a trickle charger put on your battery, and even if you store it outside, they make solar powered trickle chargers that you don't even have to worry about. Throw your solar panel up on top of your boat cover somewhere, and it'll charge it all summer long or all winter long. All you need to do is just a trickle, and that'll keep your battery maintenance up for the rest of the year. You don't have to worry about it when you go fishing in the spring. I think that's it. We'll see you next week.
We've got a couple questions here real quick. Bob Dreyer says, how does your reverse work?
Well, our reverse is electronic. So we have a toggle switch on the handle that basically energizes these magnets. And they grab onto this big brake disc, and then we use a planetary gear system inside this transmission that transfers the power from forward to reverse.
Perfect.
That's the breakdown of it.
And Mike Richards asks, where can I find a muffler like that on the motor?
This right here is our rapid muffler. We came out with it about a year ago. We've got them in stock. Many of our dealers across the country have them in stock. Check out backwaterperformance.com, and you'll see them on there. I believe retails right around $550.
And then Don Weston says, make sure you get a baffle. Mike, they do come with baffles. They all do come with baffles, so not to worry about that. That's an option that'll already be installed.
Yep.
So, cool.
All All right, that's it. We'll see you next week.